Somewhere along the sea-hazed coastline of Maine, 17-year-old Margaret Sullivan stepped off the bus carrying nothing but a canvas satchel of drawing supplies and her mother's sandwiches, wrapped in wax paper. The September air, sharp with salt and the tang of pine, filled her lungs, a crisp relief from the stifling closeness of her Boston boarding school. She had no idea that her simple weekend of sketching would begin the unraveling of one of the most clandestine espionage webs ever to operate on American shores. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and drop a comment below telling me where you're joining from. It truly makes a difference. What started as an innocent artistic pursuit would transform this quiet teenager into an accidental operative, whose perceptive eye would expose a covert apparatus that had eluded federal agents for over a year and a half. Margaret had always been pulled toward lighthouses. There was a solitary resilience in them, standing firm against the endless, grinding waves that echoed her own feeling of being set apart. At school, while other girls whispered about soldiers and swing bands, she filled her journals with architectural studies and volumes on maritime lore. Her art teacher, Miss Carolyn Bradford, had nurtured this passion, saying that true artists perceived what others merely glanced past. Margaret never imagined how prophetically those words would come pass. The Pembroke Point Lighthouse rose from a rocky promontory 3 miles from the nearest village, reachable only by a slender dirt track tunneling through dense woods. Margaret had written weeks earlier to the keeper, a Mr. Thomas Ricks, requesting to sketch the tower for her portfolio. His reply had been concise but cordial, penned in a neat, controlled script that hinted at meticulous nature. He provided precise directions and noted that visitors were scarce, especially with the war making coastal loiterers suspect. As Margaret walked the final stretch, her artist's eye unconsciously registered details. The road bore fresh tire grooves, unusual for so remote a place. Snapped branches suggested a vehicle had pushed through recently. The woods themselves held an unnatural quiet, absent the expected chorus of late afternoon birds. These observations flitted through her mind without raising alarm, simply catalogued as her boots whispered through fallen leaves. The lighthouse breached the tree-line like a bleached stone sentinel, its paint surprisingly bright against the pewter sky. The keeper's cottage stood beside it, a trim building with draped windows and a kitchen garden showing recent care. Wood smoke spiraled from the chimney, sweet with applewood. Everything looked precisely as a wartime light station should. Thomas Ricks answered her knock almost instantly, as if stationed just behind the door. A man in his early 50s, with hair gone to iron and a face weathered by decades of ocean wind, he offered a firm handshake and a polite, reserved smile. He wore the standard keeper's uniform, every detail regulation perfect. "Welcome, Miss Sullivan," he said, his accent flattening the vowels of the Maine coast. "You've chosen a decent day for it. Weather should hold till dusk. Come in and warm up. Coffee's on the stove." The cottage interior was orderly to a fault. Nautical charts papered one wall, maritime books lined a shelf by the hearth, and everything from the braided rug to the polished oil lamp spoke of a man devoted to his solitary trade. Margaret accepted the coffee, noting its unusual, bitter strength. Ricks outlined a lighthouse schedule, the rotation of the lens, the daily maintenance rituals. "I'll be making my rounds this afternoon," he told her. "You're free to sketch from any vantage, but please avoid the light room itself. The equipment is sensitive, and with the war, regulations are strict about access." Margaret assured him she understood and set up her materials on a rocky perch 50 yards from tower's base. Selecting a piece of charcoal, she fell into the familiar rhythm of looking and translating, her hand moving across the paper in sure, fluid strokes. 2 hours passed. The light shifted as clouds drifted, carving dramatic shadows that deepened the structure's austere beauty. Margaret worked steadily, filling 3 pages with varying perspectives. It was during her 4th sketch, capturing the cottage from a side angle, that she noticed something off. From this new position, a north-facing window, visible only because of the sinking sun slant, revealed a glimpse inside what seemed a storage room. There, she saw equipment that didn't belong. It resembled a radio, but far more intricate than any civilian set she knew. Her father worked for a Boston defense contractor, and she'd seen enough military-grade devices to recognize the type. This had multiple dials and what looked like a telegraph key. Stacked beside it were papers, far too many for routine logs. Margaret's pulse quickened. She forced her hand to keep sketching, but her mind raced. Maybe it's authorized, she thought. Maybe keepers need advanced radios for maritime alerts. But why hide in a back room? And why hadn't Hicks mentioned it? Footsteps crunched behind her. Hicks approached, carrying a tray with a sandwich and a glass of milk. "Thought you might be hungry," he said evenly. "You've been at it quite a while." "Thank you," Margaret replied, accepting the tray with what she hoped was a natural smile. "It's even more striking than I'd imagined." They spoke for a few minutes, about art, about his years of keeping, about the war's effect on the coast. Hicks seemed utterly ordinary, a dedicated civil servant. Yet Margaret couldn't erase the image of that radio, nor quiet the whisper that something here was deeply wrong. As Hicks returned to the cottage, Margaret made her decision. She would finish her work, thank him politely, and report what she'd seen to the town authorities. It was probably nothing. Probably she was just spooked by all the loose lips sink ships posters. But Miss Bradford had taught her to trust her sight, and her sight told her this deserved a second look. At sunset, Margaret packed her supplies. She had 5 solid sketches and ample reference for paintings. Hicks walked her to the property's edge, his courtesy unchanged. "Will you return?" he asked. "You're welcome any time, though I'd appreciate advance notice. Regulations, you understand." "I'm not sure," Margaret said honestly. "It depends on school. But thank you for your hospitality." Walking back along the dirt road, dusk thickening beneath the trees, she noticed something she'd missed before. A dark sedan, American-made, tucked partly into the underbrush a half-mile from the lighthouse. Its fenders were mud-spattered, and a tarp covered something in the back seat. The vehicle was empty, but its presence here felt all wrong. Margaret hurried her steps, suddenly eager for the bus station and the safety of lit streets. The town of Pembroke was little more than a main street, a few shops, and a combined police station and town clerk's office. Breathless, Margaret pushed inside. The deputy on duty, Frank Morrison, looked up from his paper. "You all right, miss? You look like you've seen a ghost." Margaret spilled her story, the lighthouse, the radio, the hidden car. Morrison listened patiently, but his expression softened with skepticism. "Mr. Hicks has been our keeper for 6 years," he said. "Respected. The Coast Guard inspects quarterly. If anything was amiss, they'd know." "But the radio," Margaret insisted. "Lighthouse keepers need good equipment, miss. Especially with U-boats lurking. What you saw was likely standard marine issue." Margaret felt doubt creep in. Maybe she had let wartime nerves get the better of her. She thanked him and left, feeling foolish. Yet sleep wouldn't come. Lying in her boarding house bed, she replayed every detail. The more she thought, the more certain she became. "Trust your observations," Miss Bradford's voice echoed. The next morning, she didn't board the Boston bus. Instead, she went to the post office and sent a telegram to her father. "Need you to contact your military connections. Believe I found something at Pembroke Point Lighthouse. Not imagining things. Please trust me. Love, Margaret." Her father, Robert Sullivan, had defense contracts and contacts in military intelligence. If anyone could trigger a real investigation, it was him. 3 days later, Margaret sat in a borrowed office at the Portland Coast Guard Station, across from 2 men in civilian clothes, Special Agents William Chun and Robert Foster, the Office of Naval Intelligence. They were grim-faced and thorough. "Can you draw what you saw?" Chun asked, sliding a blank sheet toward her. Margaret sketched swiftly, her trained hand reproducing the radio's distinctive dials and antenna. When she finished, the agents exchanged a look. "Miss Sullivan," Foster said carefully, "what you've drawn matches a specific type of transceiver. It is not civilian, and it is not standard issue. We need to ask you some very precise questions." For 2 hours, they dissected every moment. Finally, Chun leaned back. "We need to move. If she's right, we can't wait." "Is Mr. Hicks a spy?" Margaret asked. "We can't discuss operations," Foster replied. "But your account has been critical. We must ask you to remain in Portland for follow-up." Your father has agreed. The following week was an eternity of waiting. Then, on the 8th day, the agents returned. They looked weary but resolved. Thomas Ricks was not who he claimed. His real name was Thomas Heinrich, a foreign national who'd built a false identity over years. He'd used the lighthouse's isolation to transmit coded messages to enemy submarines. The equipment Margaret glimpsed was a sophisticated shortwave radio. But Ricks wasn't alone. His exposure led to 8 other agents along the eastern seaboard, a network passing intelligence on ship movements and coastal defenses. The sedan she'd spotted belonged to a courier posing as a traveling salesman. "Your observation gave us the evidence for warrants," Chen said. "We found coding materials, message logs, and annotated charts. The network is compromised. What will happen to him? He and his associates will stand trial. The evidence is conclusive. What you did, Miss Sullivan, likely saved lives. Those convoy attacks, some are guided by his transmissions." Margaret felt the world tilt. She was 17. She'd only wanted to sketch a lighthouse. The federal trial was swift and secure. Margaret testified, describing what she'd seen. Ricks never looked at her. He and 5 others were convicted of espionage and received severe sentences. The case might have ended there. But Margaret's keen eye caught the attention of intelligence officials. She had noticed what trained inspectors missed. 2 months after the trial, a woman named Elizabeth Thornton visited her with a proposal. "We need people who see what others overlook," Thornton said. "People with the courage to act on it. The work is classified. You would be trained in observation, analysis, and covert communication." Margaret thought of the lighthouse, the hidden radio, the submarines hunting Allied ships. "When do I start?" she asked. Her training began that summer. She learned codes, radio operation, photographic analysis. Her artistic skill proved invaluable for rendering scenes from memory. Her youth became an asset. Over the next 3 years, Margaret worked on cases she could never discuss: breaches at defense plants, document theft rings, sabotage investigations. The shy arts student was gone, forged into someone else entirely. The irony never escaped her. Ricks had prepared for detection by authorities, by Coast Guardsmen, by counterintelligence agents. He never anticipated a teenage girl with a sketchpad and the conviction to trust her own eyes. When the war ended in 1945, Margaret was 20, holding a position of responsibility within military intelligence. She carried clearances that would stay secret for decades. She later returned to her art, studying at prestigious schools, exhibiting in New York and Boston, building a quiet life in Connecticut with a fellow intelligence officer. But she never painted lighthouses. That subject belonged to the day her innocence ended and her purpose began. Decades later, declassified files brought historians to her door. "I was just doing a school assignment," she'd say. "I saw something wrong and reported it. That so much followed still astounds me." Yet consider the alignment required. Her choice of lighthouse, the angle of the sun, her fragment of technical knowledge, her persistence despite being dismissed, her father's connections. Alter one variable, and Ricks might have transmitted for years more. Intelligence analysts later estimated that breaking his network shortened U-boat operations in the sector by months and saved dozens of ships. One observant girl with a charcoal pencil against a trained espionage apparatus. It shouldn't have been a fair fight, and it wasn't. Thomas Ricks served 18 years in prison and died in 1960, unrepentant. Margaret Sullivan passed away in 2009 at 84. Among her effects was a leather portfolio holding the original Pembroke Point sketches. On the back of one, in faded pencil, she had written, "The day everything changed." The lighthouse still stands, automated now, its secret history mostly forgotten. But Margaret's story became a quiet lesson in intelligence circles. That perception can dwell in unexpected places, and that courage sometimes means simply speaking up when you know, despite all doubt, what you have seen. And that concludes our account. If you've made it this far, share your thoughts below. What part of this hidden history struck you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from the war, And check out the video on screen for another remarkable tale from the shadows of World War II. Until next time,